Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the channel where today we're going to be reviewing the sprint qualifying that's just happened today for the Brazilian Grand Prix. And I'll be honest, not the most interesting sprint session that we've seen, but I think with tomorrow looking like there could be rain, it sets up quite an interesting sprint race, I think. So we'll dive straight into SQ1, the bottom five in there, and that would be Franco Colapinto, Liam Lawson, Yuki Tsunoda, Esteban Ocon, and Carlos Sainz. And I'd say no major shocks in this bottom five. I think there's an argument to say Sainz um, was a missed opportunity. Uh, yes, they said that the team supposedly had a terrible run plan, but he also did lock up into the first corner. So, missed opportunity there. I think it's a bottle on both ends. And then obviously, is it even surprising anymore? Yuki Tsunoda. I think it's worse than his previous or like recent performances. So that's why I have the question of how is Tsunoda so far off of the pace? And I think part of this needs to be attributed to obviously the crash in FP1. Naturally, that especially in a sprint qualifying or a sprint weekend, any sort of incident in the only practice session you have is always gonna make you lose confidence. It's going to, give you less track time. It's just it stacks up with negative effects. And I think that's kind of the prime example of what we've seen here with Tsunoda. However, I think also the Red Bull just doesn't look great this weekend. It looks really unsettled, just in general, where you can see it even with Max, and I think that's the biggest indicator where we can't really blame Yuki too much, because if it looks like Max is struggling, which we'll see later, if Max is struggling, you can't expect, well, you should expect that the second seat is going to be even further off, and it's exactly what's happened. I think it's disappointing, certainly. I think for Yuki's sake, it's a bit better that Lawson's been knocked out in Q1 as well, because it doesn't reinforce the narrative of both RBs being way ahead of him. So that's the only real positive he can take from this. I think if it's the only chance he has this weekend is a chaotic sprint race, um, to recover from this. I think if it's a normal running sprint race, he's done for. Like he can't do anything from there on the grid. So it's just worrying in the sense that it clearly is the car. We go back a year ago. I know it was wet conditions, but we go back a year ago, and Yuki Tsunoda's qualifying third in the main qualifying session. And then you get to now, and he's just woefully off the pace. And I think anyone who firmly attributes that to him being a terrible driver, I just have to strongly disagree with you, I'm afraid. That car clearly is difficult. It looks really, really nervous on bumpy tracks. And yeah, it's just I think it's getting closer to, well, not closer, it's probably already been decided where Hajar's probably got the seat now. But I really hope they don't fully write off Sonoda in general from the sport because he's drawn the short straw. It seems absolutely horrible to be in his position right now. And this SQ1 certainly doesn't make his times any better. But with that said, that's kind of SQ1 talked about. We then move on to SQ2, where the bottom five were Lewis Hamilton, Alex Albon, Pierre Gasly, Gabriel Bortoleto, and Oliver Behrman. And I mean, we're all mentioning it, or we're all seeing it straight away from there. Lewis Hamilton out in the second part of qualifying, and you know what? Ferrari deserves full blame for this, right? Well, not full. They deserve a lot of blame for this, for messing up the timings. But you also need to kind of blame Hamilton for not doing a good first lap. Like it is partly his fault too. It's not all Ferrari. And it's just not good for Ferrari this weekend in general. The like obviously they didn't set laps off of fast laps off of the hard tire in practice, but also in sprint qualifying they just struggled. Like they kept on locking up. It just you could tell that they didn't have strong pace quite early on, and I think whilst I personally would have still expected both of them to be in Q3, I think it's not the sort of biggest surprise based off of SQ1 that we've seen a Ferrari for here. But once again, it's Lewis Hamilton. It's not Charles Leclerc fumbling. It's Lewis Hamilton, and it's just it's just not good enough. It really isn't. And I think everyone else, and another likes to talk about is Pierre Gasly. Um, Commentators saying that he had to slow down due to yellow flags from Charles Leclerc spinning. I don't know if that's true or not. I haven't looked yet because this is right after. But he had strong pace in SQ1, so I think they'll be slightly disappointed with 13th on the grid. Um, and then I suppose Bortoletto with his teammate up in 10th, as I'll say soon. With his teammate up in 10th, I think that's a little disappointing, especially being his home race. So I think he'll take solace in the fact that this is just sprint qualifying and hopefully comes back better for the race because clearly there's some somewhat decent pace in that Sauber this weekend. But yeah, that's kind of the main talking points for SQ2. I'd say Albon, that's probably around the pace of the Williams this weekend. Uh, I think Q3 for those top three was definitely on the cards, but I think they're all sort of in the positions relatively close to where they should be, right? So yeah, that leads on to the question of how many rookie mistakes are we seeing? I know it's not a question, I just but so many rookie mistakes, right? And I say this in the sense that it's not just Ferrari. We've seen it in Austin with the pit lane shenanigans. I just think it's absolutely unacceptable from these teams that they are fundamentally messing up the number one aim of a qualifying session of being able to get your car to do a lap. They are fundamentally failing this multiple times. And I know it's dependent on other teams, but I put extra criticism on the top teams such as Ferrari and like Red Bull do it quite often, in the sense that to me, it just feels like they're completely clueless when it comes to trying to manage something that isn't a top fighting position. Like they're not comfortable when they're lower down the grid. And you can see that with this. It's like, why not send him out earlier in the session? It's a Ferrari for goodness sakes. I know they didn't have amazing pace this session, but it should still be good enough pace that you can send them out a bit later, not right at the end, but a bit earlier compared to other people, and get a lap in. Like, why are they the last car across the line? As in a Ferrari, the last car across the line should be these smaller teams that are desperate for the best track conditions. So I just don't understand how this happens so often from supposed high level organizations. It's just completely embarrassing that you can't get a car over the line. And like I say, I know it's dependent on other teams. Like you could get blocked on your outlap, for example, but you're putting yourself in that situation. Like you can always go out earlier. And I think they've deservedly paid the price for it with Hamilton out in Q2 or SQ2, and I really hope it improves because it's just not good to see a potential Q3 contender go out because they didn't even set a lap time. Like I want to see laps from every driver. I don't want Lewis Hamilton going out in SQ2 because his team are just like, you know what, we're gonna play this risky today. I have strong opinions on that, but you know, like I say, they got what they deserved from it. If they executed it better, they probably had a chance at SQ3. So it is what it is. But speaking of which, we head to SQ3, where the top 10 was as follows: Lando Norris, Kimi Antonelli, Oscar Piastri, George Russell, Fernando Alonso, Max Verstappen, Lance Stroll, Charles Leclerc, Isaac Hadjar, and Nico Hulkenberg. And I think there's a lot to take away from this SQ3 actually. Whilst it wasn't the most interesting to watch, it wasn't a great SQ3. I think it was quite obvious who had pole, right? But it certainly throws a spanner in the works for multiple things in the context of both championships, where Lando Norris continuing the momentum kind of didn't feel in doubt, to be honest. I think from SQ1 you got the impression that he'd probably get pole position. Um, but I'm not so much going to talk about Norris because it's kind of self-explanatory. I think a standout performance is Kimi Antonelli. Great lap from him to be the second fastest car behind the McLaren that looks really strong this weekend. I think that's a great lap from him. He'll be very happy with that. And I think you have to imagine that going into the sprint race tomorrow, especially if it's a wet race, you've got to count Antonelli for a chance of diving it down turn one or down in turn one and trying to win his first sprint race because the opportunity is right there for him. Like probably the best opportunity he'll get all year to try and I know it's a sprint, but try and win a race. And I think Norris needs to be wary of that. And also the fact that Piastri is slotted right behind him. Because if he gets into some sort of tussle with Antonelli, Piastri can easily capitalize on that. Very easily. So something to look out for tomorrow. And I think it was also worth slightly saying that Piastri has sort of got his form back. It's still pretty bad, like compared to his teammate, but we'll never know how much of that is Lando Norris doing a great job compared to Oscar Piastri doing a good job but not amazing. Like it could still be decent. So I think that's good for his championship hopes in the sense that at least he is in the top three. Um, if he takes any solace in that, but the sort of main talking point for the drivers' championship is, of course, Max Verstappen down in sixth. And look, it's the big question that's going to come out from lots of people is the championship over for Verstappen after this? Because it's fair to say you see him in sixth, never really challenged the top, and it just didn't look great for him. So I think it's a fair question to ask. However, I do believe that with rain on the cards tomorrow, I think all of these starting positions in the top 10 are just completely artificial. Like if it is a raining sprint, I, I I'd put Alonso as a chance of getting a podium. You could put Piastri for winning. You could say all manner of things because it you just know it's probably going to be chaos. So I think all hope isn't lost yet for Verstappen. Um, I think he'll have a chance to limit the damage in the sprint tomorrow. And I think the most important thing to remember is look at last year, qualified 17th. Norris qualified on pole. Everyone thought at that point, championship over, he's done for. And then he wins the race. And I know there was some red flag fortunes, but this that could happen in the sprint race too. So I think it's not over yet, but I think it's certainly alarming that their dry pace is not looking great. And especially because it's touch and go whether it rains for the main race. And if it doesn't, I think it's not looking good for Red Bull. But we'll see what he does from sixth. But if you have or haven't watched my predictions video, then I urge you to watch it. But I was absolutely right. Aston Martin, best of the midfield. Come on. My team finally using 1% of their power. Um, with Alonso in fifth and Stroll in seventh. And of course, most of the applause needs to go to Alonso for outqualifying Max Verstappen. Um, and just a really strong P5 start. But I think give credit where it's due. Lance Stroll has done very well here. Like outqualified a Ferrari. You know what? That's solid for him. SQ3 appearance, I think for the first time since China. So I think Stroll should be very happy with that. Alonso should be very happy with that. And as I said earlier, it has a big effect for the Constructors' Championship because with them chasing down RB, I believe, a P5 and a P7 start in the sprint, they could definitely score a decent chunk of points. And in that tight midfield battle, that will be very, very, very impactful. And you also have to consider, even though they are a ways behind Williams in the Constructors' Championship, if Williams keep having these anonymous weekends, and if, let's say, Aston Martin continues this kind of pace, then you have to say Williams isn't completely out of the picture yet. Like, there is still a chance, whilst it is unlikely, there is still a chance. So I think that's very good from the Aston Martins. I'm glad to see them doing well again. I'm glad I predicted it right that they'd be strong here because it just feels like an Aston Martin track. It feels like an Alonso track. Um, and then I suppose the only other notable mention here is probably Nico Hulkenberg. I think it's fair to say he's probably outperformed the car a little bit. Um, I think his SQ3 run wasn't the greatest. Like I think there was probably a P9 on the table, but very, very good. Close to the points for the sprint tomorrow, and they'll be hoping to get back ahead of Haas in the Constructors' Championship if they just score a few points. So, overall, I think this sets up a pretty interesting dynamic for the sprint race. I don't, like I say, I don't think it was the greatest qualifying session. It just not much in the top three positions changed dynamically. Like you kind of saw it coming. So it wasn't great, not for Brazil standards at least. But I think hoping that there's rain tomorrow, we're in for a good one. It's a good grid for a rainy race, and even looking forward towards qualifying as well. If it's raining there, I think this sort of top 10 form is just going to completely shuffle. I don't think it's going to stay the same. So I think looking forward to the sprint tomorrow. I think money has to be on Lando Norris winning it. You can't really comfortably argue against that. Of course, you can say other drivers, but I think the most likely from the pace and where he is Lando Norris. But I'd say keep your eye out on Fernando Alonso. I know Aston Martin number one fan, but I do believe that he'll be very aggressive in the sense that if it is raining, he'll sense opportunity there, and I wouldn't put a podium off the cards for Alonso. I think also look out for, like I said earlier, Kimi Antonelli at the start, but also just Max Verstappen trying to get through the field. I think those are the main sort of interests going into tomorrow. And you know what? Very, very excited for it because I think any sort of race in Brazil is exciting. So let's hope it's a banger. Let's hope it isn't just Lando Norris going into the distance and extending his championship lead. Let's hope there's at least a battle for it. And I think it's looking good, you know? I I'm definitely thinking that Norris probably will extend his championship lead, but you know, Piastri knows he needs to lock in. I did predict in my predictions video as well that we could have a bit of contact between the two McLaren drivers, and with them first and third on a potentially rainy race, I think that that's not a completely outrageous prediction, considering Piastri's feeling like he's lost the momentum and wants to get the position back on the championship lead back from Norris. So I think it's going to be spicy. It's good that both McLarens are close, and I hope we all enjoy it. Um, I hope for the sake of my predictions, I mean it's looking okay at the moment. Again, if you haven't watched it, go back and watch it if you want to know what I've predicted. But if you enjoyed, please like and subscribe. I don't know if I'll necessarily do a video for tomorrow. I certainly will do a race review, but that is a wrap on sprint qualifying, and I hope everyone enjoys the race weekend. Thank you. Goodbye.